Well, hello and welcome to a conversation with my friend Jennifer Sakata. We are going to talk about her amazing article about the woman at the well, which I love that story. And she takes that story and tells us how we can surrender and receive grace. You don't want to miss it. You can find it on butterflyliving.org. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, Mary. What a privilege to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I am honored. I love your work. So
Thank you.
let's begin because I have some great questions for you.
Hmm.
You open your article with a story, and I appreciate your story because it's very vulnerable,
Hmm.
very authentic, and I love authenticity. Can
Hmm.
you share a little bit about that story and your inner struggle?
You bet. Well, I was about 18 years old, sitting around a campfire at our church's summer camp program, and I was a youth group leader in training. So, great place to sit with students, to sit with the Lord. Until it kind of took a little turn for me that was unexpected. So, our youth pastor, Bob, asked a question, simple question: what is it that's keeping you from receiving God's love? And this was one of those moments, when you're listening to a sermon and you think, oh, I've got five people this would be a great sermon for, but it doesn't actually apply to me. So I dismissed his question. It wasn't my question for the day. Clearly, it was for the young people who were gathered around the circle. And immediately the Holy Spirit brought to mind my mother. And I just was flooded with all of these thoughts of my mother. And as quickly as they came, my response was just as quickly, no, I am not thinking about her. I've thought about her more than enough over a lifetime. I don't need to spend any more time thinking about her. Because, like many of the people who are listening right now, I grew up in a deeply fractured, broken, and addicted home. And so the last thing I needed to do at this youth group event was to be thinking about my mother and all the ways that our relationship was broken. But as this mental dialogue continued in my head with the Lord, I got this very strong sense of Him communicate, saying, you cannot hold on to bitterness and my love for you at the same time. You have to surrender one for the other.
Wow.
But Lord, you don't understand. Don't you remember what it was like for me? And besides, if I tell her I forgive her, she's just going to say, for what?
Mm.
At which point I sense the Lord saying to me, Jennifer, I am writing a story in your mother's life, but what I'm concerned with you right now is about the love you can't receive because of the bitterness you're holding on to. So I sat for a while longer and eventually went over to the pile where there was a series of logs, picked up a log, placed it on the fire, and let it burn. The internal struggle for me was surrender because it made more sense and it was far more safe feeling to me to hold on to
Mm.
that bitterness and what I knew than to let go of it for what I had no idea would happen.
Wow. I just love so many things about your story. I love that you shared it. It's very touching, very inspiring, and the log burning.
Oh my gosh.
What a visual. We could have a
Mhm.
whole conversation about that, but we will go on to the next question because
It was, it
that's
was
just,
for
I just
sure
loved it. I
it
love a
was.
good visual. That was great. So, this is what, well, you weave surrender, which you kind of mentioned, and grace into your story with the story of the woman at the well. So, can you share the high points of her story and how it relates to your story?
The truth is, when I first came into contact with her story, I didn't think we had very much in common. Sure, we were both women, and sure, we both at some point lived on the wrong side of the tracks compared to the people around us. But I've been married only once. I have two boys who I absolutely adore. Although I'm not the most popular person in the room, I don't typically cringe or harden at the thought of people gossiping about me at any time of the day. So her story is one that I read and it intrigued me, but I didn't really think we had a lot in common until I sat with it a bit longer. And here's what we have in common. And I suspect that there are some of you listening who have this in common with her too. But the woman at the well, she is a woman who liked to be in control. She wanted to be able to call the shots, to move the conversation, to decide what was going to happen and what wasn't. She was fiercely independent. She could take care of herself and everybody else around her. In her conversation with Jesus, she was the one who pointed out to him, "You're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan. Why are you talking to me? Why would you ask me for a cup of cold water?" In other words, don't you know any better? And then when Jesus went on to ask her to bring her husband, she got quiet. "I don't have a husband." And then change the subject, which we often do, right? When someone is pushing or probing about something in our lives we're not comfortable talking about. So she changed the subject and she wants to know what's the right place to worship because clearly you must be a prophet. This is a woman who is used to being in charge because it's how she kept herself safe.
Mhm.
And yet, their conversation takes an incredibly significant turn when he begins talking to her about spirit and truth and true worship, defining for her what worship is going to look like. And then this literally mic drop moment when he says, "I am the Messiah you're waiting for." Because she's just said to him, "I don't know about all this explanation you're giving me about spirit and truth, but here's what I do know. The Messiah is going to come, and when he comes, he is going to answer all of my questions." And then, with no fanfare, fancy words, or long sermons, Jesus says to her, "I am the one you've been waiting for." And then, really, the highlight of this entire story for her is you can almost, even though we're reading it in the Bible, you can almost hear and feel this excitement building up in her like, "Wait a minute, what did you just say?" And then she leaves her water jar and she runs back to the village to the very people who had shamed her and motivated her to go out to the well at noon at the hottest part of the day because they had spent a lot of hours gossiping about her. I don't have people gossiping about me all the time, but I know what it's like to live on the outside edges looking in, waiting for that kind of acceptance and welcome and value that's unconditional. I think we all know
Yes.
what that's like. And I love that this is Jesus's longest conversation in the New Testament because I believe it comes to us then as an invitation to have a similar kind of conversation with Jesus who wants so much to give us living water, but we have to be willing to surrender the things we've been filling ourselves with instead, only to find out that they don't actually fill us at all.
That's so
So it
true.
turns out we have quite a lot in common, the Samaritan woman at the well and I.
Don't we all?
I think so.
It is such a great story. You're a
Hmm.
great storyteller.
Oh, I
You're very
love telling
captivating. I
stories.
loved
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing that story. I think it brings the story to life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a quote from your article. You said, "But to receive it, you must welcome grace and surrender to God. The soul substitutes, I like that, surrender to God, the soul substitutes that leave you thirsty, bound, and longing for what no person or thing can supply." So, what are those soul substitutes? What are some of those that we all use sometimes in
Mm.
place of living water?
Yeah. And it's easy. Basically, a soul substitute is anything that we consume or think or take in to our being. And it might satisfy us for a little while, but in a very short time, we come up empty, like leaving us with that belly ache for something
Hmm.
more. We know this isn't quite right, but we don't quite have it. So it's
Yes.
something that just doesn't fulfill us, maybe for a short time, but it doesn't truly satisfy us. And those might be things like, I don't know, binging on a Netflix series or some TV show. But it also might be more serious, like, I've been married for 19 years. And although I haven't figured this out, a lot of those first years I spent thinking that my husband was the one who would satisfy me.
Mm.
He's an incredible man, and I wouldn't trade him for anything or anyone. He is an incredible gift, but at the end of the day, he is not my savior, and he was
Right.
never created to be. But sometimes we live like these people and places and things can save us or fulfill us when they can't. Or maybe we work 50 or 60 or 70
Mhm.
hours a week, and then we find our identity in what we do. Maybe it's in ministry or serving or whatever the job is. And we get stuck because we
Mhm.
are looking for that behind the desk computer, working outside identity to fill us when that was never meant to be our identity. So these soul substitutes are replacements, if you will, for that space that only God Himself can fit and fill for us.
Yes, so good. I call them counterfeits because
Oh,
even good
yeah.
things, right?
Yes.
Even
Oh, yeah.
good things can become counterfeits.
That
You
is
know, like
so right.
exercise, that's a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it can become a counterfeit for identity as well. So good, Jennifer.
Yeah.
And you share an acronym called WELL, which was very clever. Do you want to briefly explain what the well is? Your four
Sure.
secrets?
It's more out of desperation, Mary, than cleverness because this menopausal brain needs acronyms to be able to remember what's
I
true
hear you. I hear
sometimes.
you.
So this was more about survival, I think, than than any cleverness. But it is an acronym that I put together as a reminder for how we surrender to God's grace. And it also connects with the story of the woman at the well because that's where their conversation unfolded. And ultimately, that's where she met living water. So, well is WELL, and the W is for welcome. And this is simply that space where we admit that what we need is what God has, not what some other person has or some book or some TV comedy or series, but that God Himself has what we need. It's where we make room for
Mhm.
grace, what we can't supply for ourselves. And for the woman at the well, in the beginning of their conversation, she was all about what she had to offer to that conversation. But literally, she had to put those things aside in order to make room for her conversation with Jesus. A little bit like the little girl who's walking on the beach. You know, she's got her hand just so filled with all these broken and shattered seashells, but they're beautiful to her. She picked them up along the way. And then she makes her way down the beach and she sees the most beautiful, perfectly formed sand dollar. Well, in order for her to carry it, what does she have to do? She has to let go of all the rest. She has to welcome the beauty of that sand dollar by putting aside all the others. And so when we make room for God's grace, we are welcoming the surrender that He's asking us to give, and then He gives us grace in place.
That's a beautiful visual. And I love the beach. So
Oh, I know,
I
me
will keep
too.
that one. So what's your
Good.
E?
Hang on to it. Okay, so that's the welcome. And then E is extend. And this is where we give away the grace that's been given to us. One of my favorite parts of the woman at the well story is after her conversation with Jesus, she literally is so excited about what might be true that she leaves her water jar. The very reason she had gone to the well in the first place, she leaves it behind and she runs back to the village, not to her, the man she's living with, but to all the people in the village who had canceled her, who had gossiped about her, the mean girls who made her life incredibly painful and isolating. She ran back to those people. Who does that? Only someone who
That's
has
right.
begun to surrender to the grace of God. So we welcome God's grace and then we extend God's grace by going to the very people who need it as much as we do. And then the first L is live out loud. And I've already said this, but she goes back. She could have snuck back to the guy she was living with. She could have kept it quiet and said, "Hey, I just met a guy. I think he might be the Messiah. Do you want to go check him out with me?" No, she runs back to the village, telling them all the same story that they'd heard all before, all the things they thought they knew about her. Except this time, when she told the story, she didn't tell it with shame or embarrassment or
Mm.
fear. None of that, because here's why. Because at the well, her priorities changed. Instead of worrying about what they thought about her, she was more concerned about what they thought about him.
Oh, that's
So as she
good.
went out and she told her story, she lived her story with him out loud
Mm.
so that they could meet him too. So we welcome, we extend, we live out loud. And then the second L, I'm just going to put a little confessional note before I even say it. This is probably the hardest one for me and probably for other people who like to control outcomes. This might be our hardest part of the acronym. It's to linger, to slow down, to
Mm.
pause, and to sit with the reality that Jesus is the Savior of the universe and I am not.
Mm.
I haven't shared this part of the story yet, but I did make a phone call to my mother after that campfire. And I said, "Hey, Mom, could we get together? I need to talk with you about something." We got together over ice cream, and I told her that I forgave her. And she said exactly what I knew what she would say. "Forgive me? For what?" And you can imagine, right? The
Mhm.
mental gymnastics that are going around in my head at the time, all the things I wasn't saying out loud to my mother that I was saying to the Lord. "I told you this was going to happen. I knew she was going to say this. Didn't you hear me?" But when we choose to surrender to God's grace and we will linger in God's grace, then He does something that we cannot do for ourselves. He brings a kind of softening. We're just finishing up harvesting here, so we're not tilling the soil. We're cutting everything down so that it can be consumed. Well, when we learn to linger with the Lord, He does that digging deep under the earth work in us that allows us then to take a front row seat to another story that He's writing because we were willing to linger with Him for a while. Fast forward 6 years from that very awkward over ice cream conversation. It was my 24th birthday. My mother had come to visit from out of town. And as was our tradition, and with my roommates, we were going around talking about where we had seen God at work in our lives. Everybody shared. My mother is ordinarily a very quiet woman. And after everyone shared, she said, "I'd like to say something about my daughter.
Mm.
She loved me when I was unlovable, and she forgave me when I was unforgivable."
Mm.
All those months and years after that very awkward conversation over ice cream, I was privileged to linger with God over the work that He was not only doing in my life, but 6 years later, I would get the reminder that He was patiently working in her life as well. And there's a whole other part of the story, fast forward 30 plus years later, that we may have
Mm.
to go into another day. But long story short, only just a couple months ago, I got to sit beside my mother as she came to salvation in Jesus.
Wow.
If I had held on to all that bitterness,
Mhm.
or even at the ice cream shop, if I had held on and demanded that she apologize or acknowledge the pain that she had caused me, I would have missed out on that front row seat to the work that God was already doing in her life. And that's what surrender allows us to do. It invites us to a front row seat of how He's rewriting not only our story, but somebody else's story too.
What a beautiful testimony for you and your mother. It's
Yeah.
just a beautiful story. I wish we had more time to hear
Mm.
because I know there's more to the
Oh
story.
gosh, there's more.
But people can read more.
Yeah.
They're hearing your voice, seeing your face, and they can read your words at Butterfly Living. Can you share? I wish we had more time, but can we close today and you share where can everyone connect with you? You have a great podcast. Could you give us the path to
Absolutely.
find you?
I hope it is an easy one because I would love to connect with your people. So you can find my podcast, Living the Grace Life, at any podcasting platform or now on YouTube. I've just jumped into that very large pool, so you can find me there as well. And one of the things I love as much as podcasting, maybe even more than podcasting, is speaking at women's events, workshops, retreats, day and overnight retreats. And the best place to contact me and find me about that is at jennifersakata.com. You'll find links to the podcast there, but you'll also find links to a lot of the some examples of a lot of the things that I talk about. And there's an opportunity to contact speaker page there that you can reach out to me there. Or if you just want to chat, just send me a note through my website or at jennifersakata.com, and I would love to connect with you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. And Jennifer's information will be in the notes. Thank you so much for being here. If you would like to subscribe, I would love it. We have different authors speaking speaking about great topics and sharing great stories like Jennifer. So thank you so much,
Mm.
Jennifer, and thank you
Thanks,
for
Mary.
being here.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.